At 8:22 in the evening on May 15, 2026, less than 24 hours before this moment, a magnitude 6.7 earthquake detonated at a depth of 44 kilometers beneath the floor of the Pacific Ocean, 58 kilometers east of Kesennuma, in Japan's Miyagi Prefecture, and the seismometers along Japan's northeastern coastline did not just register a tremor. They registered the reactivation of the same zone that has already been placed under a government megaquake advisory, the same zone where 162 foreshocks above magnitude 4.0 preceded the massive 7.7 magnitude rupture on April 20th, and the same zone where the Pacific Plate is pressing into the Okhotsk microplate at a convergence rate of between 7, 9, and 9.2 centimeters per year without pause, without relief, and without any mechanism by which that accumulating stress simply stops. If you rely on this channel for science grounded in verified data and explained with honesty, subscribing ensures that none of this reaches you late. This work depends on the audience that values it. Every figure in this script was drawn from official scientific and governmental sources: the United States Geological Survey, the Japan Meteorological Agency, NOAA, the Smithsonian Global Volcanism Program, NASA, the European Mediterranean Seismological Center, and peer-reviewed research. Published by institutions including Tohoku University, Kyoto University, and the University of Tokyo. But official sources are not infallible, and neither is the human process of reading them before any decision is made, whether personal, professional, or otherwise. Verify independently through the official channels. The sources are listed. The data is public. The responsibility to check belongs to all of us, but that is not even the complete picture. What the instruments are showing right now along the Japan Trench is not merely a sequence of isolated earthquakes occurring in a region already known for seismic activity. What the data shows, when every event from November 2025 through this morning is laid out in sequence, is something that geoscientists who study subduction zone behavior recognize immediately as a pattern that has, in different years and in different places along this very coastline, directly preceded catastrophic rupture. The surface event, the M7.7 that shook Miyagi Prefecture last night, is a doorway. And the room behind that doorway contains the full weight of what this tectonic system is actually capable of, confirmed not by speculation but by the geological record that stretches back more than 11 centuries. The system is not inactive. It is accumulating, and the instruments positioned along one of the most densely monitored subduction zones on the surface of this planet are recording that accumulation in real time. Begin with the timeline, because the timeline is what makes seismologists careful with their language, and careful language from a seismologist is itself data worth examining. In November 2025, a foreshock sequence began off the Sanriku coast of northeastern Honshu, the same coastline, the same plate boundary, the same fault geometry that has generated some of the most destructive earthquakes in recorded human history. Over the following months, the Japan Meteorological Agency's catalog recorded 162 earthquakes exceeding magnitude 4.0 in that zone, not 2, not 12. 162 events, 5 of them above magnitude 6.0, the strongest measuring magnitude 6.8. Then on December 8, 2025, a magnitude 7.6 struck roughly 140 kilometers north-northwest of the area where the next major rupture would occur. Then on April 20, 2026, at 4:53 in the afternoon local time, the zone expressed itself fully. A magnitude 7.7 earthquake off the Sanriku coast of Iwate Prefecture, confirmed by the GMA, with the USGS recording it at magnitude 7.4 in the global centroid moment 10, saw assigning a moment magnitude of 7.5. A rupture area of 70 kilometers by 65 kilometers, a maximum slip of 735 meters near the hypocenter, a 12-second duration for the rupture itself, with the greatest release of seismic moment occurring in less than 10 seconds after initiation. Tsunami warnings for waves up to 3 meters reached 5 prefectures. 80-centimeter waves struck Kuji and Iwate. 175,957 people received evacuation orders across 13 cities, 21 towns, and 6 villages spanning Hokkaido, Aomori, Iwate, Miyagi, and Fukushima. A USGS seismic installation at Shingo in Aomori Prefecture recorded a ground velocity of 15.01 centimeters per second. A second installation at Morioka, Iwate, recorded a peak ground acceleration of 0.400 for grams. That is the April event. The GMA issued a megaquake advisory in the immediate hours following that rupture, stating that the probability of a magnitude 8.0 or greater earthquake in the coming days had risen tenfold above background levels from 0.1% to 1%. That advisory remained active until April 27th. And then, 25 days after April 27th, at 8:22 on the evening of May 15, 2026, last night, the M7.7 struck again. Same region, same plate boundary, same subduction interface, 58 kilometers east of Kesennuma, 44 kilometers deep, felt over a vast region with an estimated 849,000 people experiencing moderate shaking and 5.75 million experiencing light shaking. For aftershocks above magnitude 2.0 followed within hours, the strongest a magnitude 3.2 occurring just 6 minutes after the main shock. The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center confirmed no tsunami threat from this event. The USGS issued a green alert for shaking-related fatalities and economic losses. But here is where this account becomes genuinely significant. A green alert from the USGS and an absence of immediate tsunami threat does not describe the state of the tectonic system. It describes the outcome of this specific event measured in isolation. The tectonic system is not measured in isolation. Think about what 44 kilometers means. 44 kilometers is roughly the altitude at which most commercial weather balloons reach their ceiling before they burst and fall back to Earth. It is 3 times the cruising altitude of a commercial aircraft. It is a distance that, measured vertically downward from where you are sitting right now, passes through the entire crust of the Earth and into the uppermost reaches of the mantle. That is the depth from which last night's earthquake radiated. From a point nearly 3 times the cruising altitude of a commercial aircraft, buried beneath the ocean floor itself, a section of rock failed along the subduction interface and released energy sufficient to shake nearly 7 million people. At that depth, the temperatures and pressures involved are conditions that laboratory science can only approximate. The rock being deformed at 44 kilometers is not the same material in the same state as the stone that forms a mountain you could stand on. It is a different phase of the same planet, compressed, heated, subjected to pressures that would reduce any surface material to a state that has no analog in ordinary human experience, fractured in ways that surface geology cannot fully anticipate. And here is the other number that demands to be held alongside the depth. The convergence rate between the Pacific Plate and the Okhotsk microplate in this exact region is between 7, 9, and 9, 2 centimeters per year. That sounds manageable, 8 centimeters, the length of a finger, per year. But across the full length of the subduction zone, across the full depth of the plate interface, across decades and centuries without release, 8 centimeters per year is not a gentle motion. It is an inexorable transfer of energy into the fault system, energy that has no outlet except eventual rupture. The question is not whether. The accumulated stress must eventually be released. The question is not whether a rupture is possible. The question is not whether this region is capable of generating something far larger than anything instruments detected last night. This is not a hypothesis. This is documented in the geological record, preserved in the sediments on the ocean floor and in the coastal geology of the Tohoku region, stretching back more than 1,000 years. Think about the people living along this coastline right now. Think specifically about the city of Kesennuma, population 61,100, located 41 kilometers from last night's epicenter. Kesennuma sits on a Ria coastline, a deeply indented fjord-like topography shaped by submergence of river valleys, a geography that in the event of a significant tsunami acts as a funnel, compressing and amplifying wave energy as it moves inland. The people who live in Kesennuma go to work each morning, send children to school along roads that have evacuation route markers on every corner, and they have done this since March 11, 2011, when the memory of what a rupture on this very plate boundary did to their coastline was etched into the geography of the town itself. They know, they have been told by the GMA, they have practiced the evacuation routes. And yet the tectonic system does not negotiate with preparedness. It does not respond to building codes or warning systems or the careful language of government advisories. It operates on a timescale that makes all human preparation feel, in the moment of rupture, simultaneously essential and insufficient, 49 kilometers. To the east-southeast of last night's epicenter sits Sofunato, population 35,452. 52 kilometers to the south of the events it's Kamaishi, population 43,107. 129 kilometers to the northwest lies Morioka, population 290,700, all felt last night's event. All are positioned within the region where the seismic record since November 2025 has shown an elevated and persistent pattern of activity on a plate boundary that is not merely active, it is the single most tectonically loaded subduction interface in the northern hemisphere east of the Kamchatka Peninsula. Now travel backward. Not in speculation, in the verified geological record. The question of what this system is capable of was answered definitively on March 11, 2011, at 2:46 in the afternoon, when a magnitude 9.029, 1 megathrust earthquake, the fourth most powerful earthquake ever recorded by seismic instruments anywhere on Earth, and the most powerful ever recorded in Japan's history, ruptured a 300-mile-long section of the Japan Trench, the same trench that last night's magnitude 6.7 sits directly above. The seafloor uplifted by several meters. Tsunami waves reached heights of 38.9 meters, which is nearly the height of a 13-story building crashing over the coastline of northeastern Japan. The waves traveled 6 miles inland in some locations. The confirmed death toll from the National Police Agency of Japan stands at 15,899 dead and 3,962 missing and presumed dead, with over 6,150 injured. Miyagi Prefecture accounted for 59% of the deaths and missing. Iwate Prefecture accounted for 32%. Fukushima the remaining 9%. Over 500,000 buildings were damaged or destroyed. Japan's main island of Honshu moved 8 feet eastward. The Earth's axis tilted by between 10 and 25 centimeters. The earthquake lasted 6 minutes. 6 minutes of continuous violent shaking felt across the entire country. The economic damage is estimated at between $220 billion and $235 billion, making it among the costliest natural disasters ever recorded in human history, and the nuclear consequences at Fukushima Daiichi, where 14-meter tsunami waves overtopped 10-meter seawalls and disabled the cooling systems for 3 reactors, introduced a dimension of catastrophe that extended far beyond the coastline and far beyond the moment of rupture. That was the Japan Trench in 2011. That is not a historical reference meant to illustrate what a subduction zone can do in the abstract. that is, the specific fault system, the Japan Trench, the convergence of the Pacific Plate beneath the Okhotsk microplate that hosted last night's magnitude 6.7. The seismic energy released in 2011 was equivalent to approximately 600 million times the energy released by the Hiroshima atomic bomb. That is what this plate boundary is capable of. This has already happened once. The record of it is still preserved in the rock, in the sediment layers, in the coastal topography, and in the memory of everyone who lives along the Sanriku coast, but travel further back still, because 2011 was not the first time. The 869 Sanriku earthquake, also a great megathrust event on the Japan Trench, generated a tsunami that inundated the Sendai Plain and its deposit layer. A distinct band of marines and found kilometers inland in the geological record became one of the foundational pieces of evidence that paleoseismologists used to argue, years before 2011, that the Japan Trench was capable of generating magnitude 9 class events. That argument was contested before 2011. It is not contested now. The system has already demonstrated across multiple centuries that it stores energy at the rate of 8 to 9 centimeters of convergence per year, and it releases that energy in events of extraordinary magnitude with a recurrence interval that the geological record suggests is measured in centuries, not millennia. The last full expression was 15 years ago. 15 years of continued convergence at 8 centimeters per year means that since March 11, 2011, approximately 1.2 meters of potential slip deficit has reaccumulated across that plate interface. The system is not resting. It is reloading, and now connect this to the larger framework of what is happening. Simultaneously, because the Japan Trench does not operate in isolation from the broader geodynamic system of which it is a part. The Nankai Trough, the 700-kilometer-long subduction zone off the Pacific coast of southwestern Japan, where the Philippine Sea Plate subducts beneath the Eurasian Plate at approximately 43 to 50 millimeters per year, represents a separate but geodynamically connected fault system that Japanese scientists have assessed. Carries a probability of 62.94. 5% of producing a magnitude 8 to 9 earthquake within the next 30 years, according to a September 2025 report by Japan's Earthquake Research Committee. Honorary Professor Kawada Yoshiaki of Kyoto University placed the 50-year probability above 90%, a magnitude 8.5 to 9. One event on the Nankai Trough, according to Japan's Central Disaster Management Council, carries a projected death toll in a worst-case scenario of 298,000 people and the destruction of 235 million buildings. Tsunami waves in the most exposed coastal areas could reach 30 meters. The tsunami warning time for Nankai Trough communities would be approximately 5 minutes compared to the 17 minutes that Tohoku communities had in 2011, and which was still insufficient to save nearly 20,000 lives, and megaquakes along the Nankai Trough have occurred every 90 to 150 years across the past 1,400 years of recorded Japanese history. The last one was in 1944. Do the arithmetic. The system is not theoretical. It is overdue by any recurrence interval the historical record supports. What connects these two systems, the Japan Trench in the north and the Nankai Trough in the southwest, is not merely geography, and it is not merely the coincidence of sharing the same island nation above them. It is the physics of stress transfer, and the physics of stress transfer does not recognize national borders or administrative categories. When large earthquakes rupture sections of a subduction zone, the stress that was holding the locked portion of the fault together is redistributed. It does not disappear. It transfers laterally along the fault system, into adjacent locked patches, into the mantle wedge above the subducting slab, into the network of crustal faults that overlie the deeper interface. Scientists who study Coulomb stress transfer the mechanism by which failure on one fault segment changes the failure probability on adjacent segments have documented this process across multiple major earthquakes globally. The principle is not controversial. It is accepted seismological physics. When a section of a fault slips, it unclamps the fault surface at that location, and the stress it was carrying is redistributed to the fault areas surrounding the rupture zone. The rocks adjacent to where the slip occurred now carry more of the total stress load. The question is not whether this redistribution happens. The question is whether the adjacent segments were already sufficiently close to failure that the additional stress increment is enough to trigger them. The 2011 Tohoku rupture, which released the energy equivalent of 600 million Hiroshima bombs in 12 seconds, reorganized the stress field across an enormous region. The aftershock sequences and the persistent seismicity recorded since November 2025 are part of that reorganization still working through the system 15 years later. And then there is the solar dimension, which the long-view perspective on planetary systems demands be included not as speculation but as a documented connection that geoscientists continue to study. The period since late 2024 has coincided with the peak of solar cycle 25, a period of elevated solar activity during which multiple X-class solar flares and associated coronal mass ejections have driven geomagnetic storm conditions across Earth's magnetosphere. The relationship between geomagnetic storm activity and the triggering of seismic events along pre-stressed fault systems remains an area of active scientific inquiry, with peer-reviewed studies documenting statistical correlations between elevated geomagnetic activity and increased seismicity rates in tectonically loaded regions. The mechanism proposed involves electromagnetic coupling with ionospheric and crustal conductivity, as well as magnetotelluric effects on fluid-saturated fault zones. This connection is not proven to the standard of established physical law. It is documented statistically and studied by institutions including the Russian Academy of Sciences and various university departments in Japan and the United States. The instrument data from the Japan Trench region, read against the solar activity record of the past 6 months, does not allow a confident causal claim. But it does allow a reasonable scientific question, which is this: in a fault system already loaded to a significant fraction of its rupture threshold, does the additional perturbation of elevated geomagnetic activity change the probability of triggered failure? The honest answer, given the current state of the science, is that no one knows for certain, and scientists choose their language carefully here, and that careful language is itself the warning. There is a second connected system that the ocean temperature record demands attention to. The Pacific Ocean's thermal state in 2025 and into 2026 has been characterized by anomalously warm sea surface temperatures across the western Pacific, a condition that affects the density and viscosity of ocean water overlying the subduction zone and influences the rate of sediment loading on the seafloor above. The plate interface, changes in water loading, even gradual ones driven by thermal expansion and sea level variation, alter the normal stress on fault surfaces at depth. The effect on any individual rupture is small. The effect accumulated across decades, combined with post-glacial sea level rise that has itself been loading oceanic fault systems with increasing water mass since the end of the last ice age, contributes to the long-term stress environment that governs when and how tectonic systems release their accumulated energy. The ocean is not a passive observer of what happens beneath it. It is a participant in the mechanics of the fault system it sits above. Come back now to the present. Come back to today, May 17, 2026. Come back to the data that exists at this moment on the instruments operated by the GME, the USGS, the HyNet and KNet seismic networks operated by Japan's National Research Institute for Earth Science and Disaster Resilience, the densest seismic monitoring network deployed anywhere on Earth. Those instruments recorded 162 foreshocks above magnitude 4.0 beginning in November 2025. They recorded a magnitude 7.6 in December 2025. They recorded the magnitude 7.7 on April 20, 2026, which the GME confirmed as a megaquake advisory triggering event. They recorded 17 aftershocks of magnitude 4.0 or higher in the days following April 20th, the strongest measuring magnitude 5.6, and then they recorded last night's magnitude 6.7 58 kilometers east of Kesennuma at a depth of 44 kilometers on the same plate interface, generating moderate shaking felt by 849,000 people and light shaking, detected by 5.75 million more. That sequence from November 2025 to last night is not a statistical anomaly in a region that experiences approximately 2,900 earthquakes per year within 100 kilometers of last night's epicenter. It is a sustained, elevated pattern of seismic expression on a locked plate boundary that has demonstrated in 2011 and across more than 11 centuries of geological record before that exactly what it does when the accumulated stress in the system exceeds the frictional resistance of the fault interface. The monitoring is in place. Detection is possible. Prediction-specific, reliable prediction of the time, place, and magnitude of the next major rupture is not. That remains beyond the capability of every seismic monitoring system on Earth. Consider the population living within the immediate hazard zone of the Japan Trench's northern segment today. Consider specifically the residents of Ofunato, that coastal city of 35,452 people, positioned 49 kilometers east-southeast of last night's epicenter, on a ria coastline shaped over geological time by the same tectonic forces that built the plate boundary above which those people sleep tonight. On the morning of March 11, 2011, many of those same people or their parents, their neighbors, their colleagues went to work along those same roads. By the afternoon, the water was in the streets. By the evening, the maps of what existed and what remained had to be redrawn. The rebuilt seawalls today stand taller. The evacuation signs were installed at every intersection. The children in Ofunato practice evacuation drills not as theoretical exercises but as living institutional memory of what happened in their lifetimes or in the lifetimes of the people who raised them. The evacuation routes are marked. The seawalls, rebuilt after 2011, stand higher than they did on March 11, 2011. The early warning system operated by the GME can broadcast alerts to mobile phones within seconds of detecting the faster-moving P wave of a major rupture, giving residents between 10 and perhaps 30 seconds of warning before the stronger shaking arrives depending on their distance from the epicenter, 30 seconds. 2. Leave a building to reach higher ground. To travel 30 meters of elevation gain before the first wave of a potential tsunami arrives. 30 seconds is not nothing. In earthquake engineering terms, 30 seconds of warning is enormously valuable. But 30 seconds is not enough time to drive to safety from the coastal neighborhoods of Ofunato. It is not enough time for a person over the age of 72 to walk 200 meters uphill. The system is extraordinary, the geometry is merciless, and then there is the question that Japanese government scientists are wrestling within the aftermath of last night's M6.7, the same question they have been wrestling with since April 20th. Is this ongoing seismicity part of the aftershock decay sequence of the main April 20th event, following the statistical patterns described by Omori's law, or does it represent a separate phase of seismic activation, a reloading of a different portion of the plate interface, or a triggering of adjacent fault segments that were already close to failure before April 20th? The two interpretations carry very different implications. If the M6.7 is a late aftershock of the April 20th event, its occurrence 25 days later is unusual but not unprecedented for a magnitude 7.5 5 main shock-aftershock sequences from events of that size can generate magnitude 6, 5 or larger events at intervals of weeks and months, if the M7.7 represents the activation of a zone that was not the primary slip area of the April 20th event if it is occurring on a different section of the plate boundary, one that was already accumulating stress independently, then the situation is more complex and more serious. The epicenter coordinates, the depth, and the focal mechanism of last night's event will be analyzed against the slip model of the April 20th rupture to determine which of these interpretations the data supports. Those analyses are being conducted right now by seismologists at the GME at Tohoku University, at the Earthquake Research Institute of the University of Tokyo. The answers will come, but they will not come in the next hour, and they will not arrive with certainty. What is certain is this: the Japan Trench, along its full length from Hokkaido south through the Tohoku region to the area offshore Ibaraki Prefecture, has been in a state of heightened seismic expression since November 2025. The convergence of the Pacific Plate has not slowed, the locked patches of the fault interface have not unlocked. The stress that was already accumulating before April 20th was partially released by the April 20th rupture, but only partially, and only in the specific spatial zone where that rupture propagated. Adjacent portions of the fault boundary, both north and south of that rupture zone, remain loaded. The Coulomb stress redistribution from April 20th has, in the way that physics always operates, increased the stress on those adjacent sections. Last night's M7.7 occurred within 58 kilometers of Kesennuma, within the zone where that stress redistribution was greatest. The instruments showed it. The instruments are still showing it this morning. There are some things that even the most sophisticated monitoring system ever deployed on this planet cannot tell you. It cannot tell you whether the magnitude 6.7 that struck last night was the largest event this reactivated zone will produce in this cycle, or whether it was a further foreshock in a sequence that has not yet reached its maximum expression. It cannot tell you the date or the hour or the specific segment of fault that will next fail. Operational earthquake forecasting, the science of converting real-time seismicity data into probability statements about what happens next, is among the most challenging problems in all of applied geophysics, and the researchers working on it at institutions including Tohoku University are candid about the limits of what current methods can reliably produce. Naoshi Hirata, honorary professor at the University of Tokyo and head of Japan's Earthquake Research Committee, stated in reference to the Nankai Trough probability estimates, "An actual earthquake is an unpredictable natural phenomenon. It may be more than 30 years away, but it may come within a year." That sentence, spoken by one of Japan's most senior seismologists, is not hedging, it is precision. It is what the data actually allows a scientist to say when they are committed to not saying more than the evidence supports. This is the condition in which 126 million people live in Japan today, not in a country that is unaware of its seismic exposure. Japan has the most advanced earthquake early warning system on Earth, the most stringent earthquake-resistant building codes of any major nation, the most thoroughly monitored subduction zone in the world. The GME can deliver a shaking alert to every mobile phone in the country within seconds of a P-wave detection. Prefectural governments have mapped every evacuation route and posted it at every intersection on every coastal road from Hokkaido to Kyushu. The rebuilt seawalls along the Sanriku coast stand taller than any structure those communities had in place on March 11, 2011. Japan has done everything that engineering and public policy can do, and the Japan Trench continues to accumulate. The Nankai Trough continues to load. The Pacific Plate continues to press into the Okhotsk microplate at between 7, 9, and 9.2 centimeters per year every year without exception, as it has 4 millions of years before the first human being stood on this coastline and looked out at the ocean without knowing what the water above the trench was hiding. Last night's magnitude 6.7 was recorded. It was reported. The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center assessed it. The USGS issued its alert classification. The GME monitored the aftershock sequence. The people of Kesennuma, Endo Funato, and Kamaishi felt the ground move beneath them again and waited, as they have been waiting since November 2025, to learn whether this was another release of accumulated energy or the beginning of the sequence that precedes the next great rupture. That question remains open. The instruments are running, the seismologists are watching. And the Pacific Plate, indifferent to all of it, continues its descent into the mantle at the rate of a finger's width per year, a rate that, sustained across the 15 years since the last great rupture on this boundary, has already rebuilt more than a meter of potential slip that the Earth has not yet found an outlet to release. The geological record of the Sanriku coast contains the signatures of great earthquakes that struck this shore in 869, in 1611, in 1896, in 1933, and in 2011. Each of those events was, at the time, separated from the last great rupture by an interval measured in decades or centuries. Each of them arrived, as all great earthquakes arrive, at a moment that the science of the time could not predict with precision. Each of them left its mark not only in the sediment layers and the coastal topography, but in the number of people who did not survive long enough to be warned. The 1896 Meiji Sanriku earthquake and the tsunami it generated killed an estimated 22,000 people along this same coastline. The 1933 Showa Sanriku earthquake killed approximately 3,000. The same coast, the same fault system, the same ocean. The same interval of accumulation followed by the same catastrophic release. The system is not inactive. The system is accumulating. And it has been doing this silently, invisibly, beyond the reach of any surface observation that does not involve the instruments specifically designed to detect it on the ocean floor, beneath the monitoring networks and beneath the coastlines and beneath the daily lives of millions of people who have built their homes and their fishing harbors and their schools on land that the Pacific Plate has been pressing against for longer than any human record extends, and will continue pressing long after the last instrument we have built to measure it has corroded to nothing and returned to the earth from which it was made.